Welcome to the Graduate Job Podcast, your home for weekly information and inspiration to help you get the graduate job of your dreams.
Welcome to episode 6 of the Graduate Job Podcast. Today I speak with author and career coach David Shindler, who guides us through the tricky transition period from university to getting a job. Recently graduated and stuck in a rut? Or soon to graduate and you want to make the transition process as smooth as possible? Then this is the episode for you. All set? Let's go straight to episode 6. Hello and welcome to another edition of the Graduate Job Podcast. I'm very excited today to be speaking to David Shindler. David is an independent coach, blogger, speaker, founder of the Employability Hub and author of Learning to Leap, a guide to being more employable. David, welcome to the Graduate Job Podcast.
Thank you, James. Very pleased to be here. Looking forward to speaking to you.
Excellent. I've given the listeners a brief introduction, but before we jump into our topic today, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about what it is that you do?
Yeah, I think the way I describe myself in terms of what I provide and the kind of value I add is I stimulate insights for job and career actions of students and graduates, but also people working in the workplace. So I do that by coaching. I'm a qualified coach and been doing it for many years. And I also do that, as you say, through various other media, whether it's in person publicly, speaking about topics, blogging, and running a website with free resources for graduates and so on. So my focus is very much on helping people to find their kind of careers and work identities and a direction for themselves. And predominantly, there's three things that I focus on: getting people to have greater clarity for themselves, building people's confidence based on that clarity, and making decisions that are right for them.
And today we're going to cover a topic which was inspired actually by a post on your blog, which I would recommend to anyone, learningtoleap.co.uk, which is transitioning from university to work.
Yep.
And I know it can be a big jump from the world of lectures, pot noodles, student nights out on a Wednesday, to the 9 to 5 of a job. If I was a recent graduate, what tips would you offer to assist in the transition from university to work?
There's a number of things. I think the first thing is to take a step back. It's very tempting as a brand new graduate because you're feeling under pressure to go out and get a job and capitalize on that degree and leap into something. If you haven't done the groundwork and if you haven't done some of the soul searching and thinking about who you are, what you want, and what kind of environment you want, and what would suit you, you can fall foul of jumping into something and then jumping into something else and then jumping into something else. And then before you know it, after a few years, you've been bouncing around the job market rather aimlessly. So for me, it's take a step back and think about how you want to present yourself to the marketplace. So kind of at the heart of it is knowing yourself well enough, but equally understanding how the world sees you and how you want to present that to the world and to shape that yourself. And that takes a bit of planning and a bit of strategy, etc. And so I often say to people, forget the 5-year plan. Think about the next 6 months. How are you going to position yourself in employers' minds? What do you want them to see? And focusing on the best of you, what you want to offer to employers. So that's my starting point, is to not dive into firing out CVs left, right, and centre, because you'll be disappointed. It's more about being targeted and clear and having a clear plan and strategy about how you want to present yourself.
No, I agree, and I think that's one of the problems that students have when they graduate is there's so many opportunities out there, and it's difficult then to narrow down exactly the right way to go with their first career choice. Are there any exercises that you would recommend to help people to narrow down that choice and to make the right decision the first time?
Exercises, maybe I describe it in a slightly different way. what people, many young people struggle with is having a clear view about themselves, often because they've never asked the question. So for me, feedback is one of the most important things that students and graduates coming out of university could do. Just getting a sense of the people that know them best and people they've worked with and lecturers and tutors and friends, etc., to give them feedback on what they're good at, what they're like when they're at their best, what their particular talents are, what they're good at, etc. Because we sometimes look at ourselves and can be quite self-deprecating or a bit shy about talking up our positives, etc. So getting feedback for me is a starting point. And then using that feedback to shape the messaging and communication and personal brand you want to put across.
And how important would you say mindset is in this this reflective period?
I think this is more important than people tend to think. So if you think about all the competition you've got out there for jobs amongst graduates, lots and lots of graduates with similar qualifications, maybe in the same sector, in the same areas, etc., of subject matter. The thing that's going to differentiate them is quite often going to be their attitude rather than the skills or qualifications they've got. Quite often recruiters will take the approach of hiring for attitude and then training the individual for the skills once they've got them inside the organisation. If you've got the wrong person inside the organisation who's got a first-class degree but can't get on with people, they're not going to last long. So it's much more important that you have the right attitude, right professionalism that employers are seeking, and not worry so much about the qualification side of things, because the marketplace is changing. Increasingly, employers are saying, it's not the first thing we look at is the degree. What we're looking at is well-rounded, well-grounded individuals who've had got a bit of life experience, and that could be, a range of things from what you do in your holidays, work experience you've done in part-time jobs, volunteering, places you've been, stuff that you've done off your own back that demonstrate that you're prepared to roll your sleeves up and have a good work ethic.
No, agreed. And as you mentioned in your most recent blog, companies such as Grant Thornton and Evershed who are actually removing the criteria for a specific degree class and are more open to students who might have got lower grades but have a more rounded potential.
I think again the challenge for graduates coming out of university is to take the emphasis away from themselves and start looking at what it is that the company, the organisation, the business is trying to achieve, and what it wants to achieve from employing you. So the focus has got to be more on the employer than on yourself, and it's about that match that you're trying to get. Saying, well, if the organisation has got a particular need for a particular job and it's trying to go in a particular direction, how do I fit with that? What can I add from my experience that will help that organisation achieve that? Rather than saying, what's in it for me? I want to do this. I want to do that. Look at me. Look at me. Look at me. The emphasis has got to be the other way around.
No, completely. One aspect that I know I struggled with personally after leaving university was it was quite a emotional roller coaster of the anticipation of applying for jobs, and then sometimes the rejection of not getting them when you built yourself up to it being the job that you really wanted. What range of emotions would graduates typically go through, and what can they do to mitigate these?
Yeah, it's going to be a really difficult thing leaving university. In fact, I've got 3 daughters, and 2 of them have been through university, and as soon as they came back after uni, it's quite a sort of difficult time, quite a destabilising time, because you've been surrounded by support and a peer network, and you know exactly what you're going to be doing, and you get into certain routines, etc. And then as soon as you leave university, you're quite often going to end up going back home, and that support network disappears and goes around the country doing different things, and you suddenly find yourself potentially quite isolated. A lot of your friends may have moved away, etc., whilst you've been away at university. So you're suddenly left with this sort of future ahead of you, and you need certain resilience, and you need a certain amount of self-motivation to start to act and to think in a different way. So shedding the mindset that you have at university of deadlines for assignments, going to the library, partying, and just looking after yourself, suddenly you have to start thinking about other people and working in a team potentially in organizations, and having to get quite pragmatic. And that can be quite a tough period of time. So taking action and being able to do things for yourself, so being quite resourceful is going to be really important when you come out of university. So it can be quite sort of a lonely period, I think, for quite a few graduates. And they often say they miss their friends and fellow students. And some people will come out thinking, oh, I'm just going to walk into a job, and then find it's not quite what they thought. So that can lead to, lowering of confidence. Some people go out with a lack of confidence in the first place because they're not quite sure where they're going and what they want to do. So it's really important to find support at that stage. So first of all, recognizing where you are in that little emotional journey you're on. Is it something that you're aware of, or is it something you need to get feedback on to find out exactly what's needed for you next? So for me, it's getting the right support around you, whatever way that may be. And that's where coaching can come in, but it could also be friends, family, going back to your career service, for example. It's a little known fact, I think, for a lot of students that quite often the career service will support a graduate for up to 3 years after they leave. Okay. And so people tend to think, oh, I've left university, I don't, now what?
And what can students do whilst at university to make the transition process easier and to ensure that they are ready for applying for work and for work itself?
The most obvious thing is when you're at university, and it has to start in year one when you arrive and go through, is to get as much work experience as possible, because the more you have an understanding of what's required in a workplace, the easier it will be for you to talk about your experience in ways that translate to what employers want, but also will mean that your transition will be easier because you know what to expect. So internships, work placements, volunteering, any kind of work experience whatsoever will stand you in good stead to make that transition easier, because you know what's required.
No, definitely. And we touched upon rejection earlier. Unless you're very lucky, you're not going to get the dream job at your first attempt. So how would you recommend that people deal with failure and try to learn from it?
I think you're absolutely right about the dream job. I think managing your own expectations, wherever your first job is unlikely to be for life. If you talk to anybody, if you were to talk to your lecturers and professors, or you would talk to anybody who's worked for 20 or 30 years and said, did you expect to be here when you were a student or when you were younger? Most people would say no, because most jobs and most careers are non-linear. Lots and lots of things can get in the way. So managing your expectations that you're not necessarily going to start off in a job that's, it's not for life. It's a starting point, and it's a way of grounding yourself and deciding what to rule in and what to rule out. So it's a lot of it's about exploring and being curious and experimenting, but following things that are of interest to you, things that you're good at, and working things out as you go along. And then it's about seizing opportunities. So quite often people will get rejected, and to see it as a step along a journey, as part of the adventure, that will be a more positive way of looking at it, rather than thinking I failed, because we'll all fail several times, many times. And it would be extraordinary if you go through life without getting made redundant at some point, finding a job that doesn't suit you, the company goes bust when you're least expecting it. These are all things that happen to people in their careers and in their lifetime. So not taking it personally, but understanding that things change, and therefore you've got to have the wherewithal to deal with that change. that's not a bad experience to go through. You wouldn't wish it on people, but it happens. So if things don't work out, I'll give you an example of the first job I ever had. When I came out of university, I did a law degree, and when I came out of university, I came to the conclusion I didn't want to be a lawyer. What I really wanted to do was to be in the movie business, because that was my particular personal interest when I was growing up, and I wanted to be behind the scenes, involved in the cinema, not in front of the camera. So I abandoned going to College of Law, even though I had a place there, and I got myself a job as an assistant cameraman in a film company, and a very small company. It turned out that I had all the practical skills of Mr. Bean, and I nearly wrecked £10,000 worth of equipment by doing something wrong, and they let me go. And I soon realised that, I came out of that thinking, oh, now what? Because my dreams were shattered. But actually, it was one of the best things that could have happened to me, because it made me realise that actually what I thought was what I wanted to do wasn't. Therefore, I had to rethink. But I also knew I didn't want to be a lawyer, so it took me down a different path.
I know on the grad scheme that I joined, and there's a common theme for people, is you build up this impression of what you think work's going to be, and then you join the company, and you suddenly realise that the reality is very different than your expectations. And on my intake of 18 people, one of the guys, I think he lasted a week. He just said, this isn't for me. Yeah. And, moved on. And to be honest, there was a lot of people who probably felt the same, but, dragged it out for a year, 18 months, when if they'd just bitten the bullet, they probably would have been in a better position. Yeah,
and I think the learning from that is knowing that what you don't want as much as what you do want. And the way my career progressed was very much a case of observing as I went along what the things that I was good at and those things that I wasn't, and building that up over time so that I could start to tell a story about myself that reflected some common themes. So for me, I'm quite analytic, and I am somebody who is a good facilitator. So I work well with groups and individuals in terms of facilitating their learning, but also I'm somebody who writes well and is very good with information and data. As time progressed through different types of jobs, those talents became strengths because I developed them through practice. So facilitation became coaching. The analytical writing bit became blogging and authorship, etc. So what happens is you start to realize that those common core things you're good at become the things that define you. So for me, one of the lessons for graduates is to, acknowledge or at least understand what some of those core things that you know about yourself and that other people know about you, and build on them, because they're probably the things that come naturally to you. They're probably the things that will define you and help you to find your place in jobs and careers.
No, I think that's brilliant advice, and something that personally in my early career was each job I learnt a little bit more about what I didn't want to do as opposed to what I did want to do. And it's only as I've got older that I've begun to think more deeply about what is it I'm actually good at and what is it that I actually like, and which areas of my skill set do I want to develop and get deeper in.
Exactly. So for me, the idea of finding the perfect job, perfect career straight off is a bit of a myth. And my advice for a lot of young graduates, etc., is go and explore, go and experiment, go try things out. Make choices, make decisions based on what feels right, and slowly but surely those things will emerge for you. They may not be there right at the beginning, but they will emerge because you'll start to learn from that experience.
No, completely. Looking further forward and thinking for people who have got the job that they dream of, what can they do to make sure that they hit the ground running and make a good impression in their first weeks and months?
One of the things I think is to strategically shape how you want to be remembered almost. So it's almost like What do you want people to be saying about you when you're not in the room in 6 months' time? What do you want people to be saying about you to your face in a year's time, so that you actually start to position yourself in the organization? So that means you've got to get out and about, you've got to go and network internally, you've got to put yourself across in a way that's how you want to be accepted, and you being at your best. So in effect, you're growing and reflecting your personal brand within an organization. And in that way, people begin to get to know you. And so sharing stuff about yourself, being proactive, willing to take things on. I always believe that you should say yes more than no, because when opportunities come up, projects, opportunities to sit on groups, etc., you never know where that's going to lead you, and there's always something beneficial that will come out of it. And as long as you manage that in terms of not overloading yourself, it's more about risk-taking. And I think that's probably one of the lessons I learned is I wish I'd taken more risks when I was younger. I think we all have that kind of fear factor about showing our backsides in front of people or not being up to it, etc. I sense also from this generation that they're more willing to do that, to take risks. So I encourage you. I'd say, you may not know much about that particular topic or whatever, but it's about your basic personality and your basic strengths, etc., will get you through, and you'll learn about those things as long as you're open and honest and have a certain amount of humility about it.
No, I definitely agree. And as you mentioned at the beginning there, in my previous company, the question I kept on being asked was, what do you want to be famous for? What is your USP in the company that people are gonna know you for? And it was a question I found difficult to answer. It
is a difficult one to answer because some people will say, well, I'm not that ambitious, or I don't really know what I want to be remembered for. So you can't really answer that question unless you've done some thinking about yourself and what you know about yourself. So self-awareness and capturing those things that are truly you help you to start moving in the direction you want to go. And I think values are really important about this as well, and it's some other area that we haven't touched upon, but understanding what's really important to you is a really good compass for people. So even if you don't know where you're going and what you actually specifically want to do, understanding the kind of your own value set helps you to identify the kind of environment you want to be in. So for me, it's, my family background and everything about me has been around equality, justice, fairness. So I always wanted to be within an organisation that cared about its employees, that did good as a purpose, and so on, because that fitted with my personal values. It affects the way I do business now with other organisations, because I expect certain standards of behaviour in business terms because of that whole value set, and I will go the extra mile to help others, and I kind of expect it in return, I suppose, in some ways. So yeah, standards and values, etc., are important to me. Principles are really important to me. That then affects the kind of places and people I want to work with.
And as you mentioned at the beginning of the interview, it's that period of reflection that you have transitioning from university to work, where you can, begin to think about what it is that you want and the type of company that you want. And if you can do that thinking at the beginning, it's going to save you so much trouble down the line.
And it's and you can get help for that. You don't have to do that alone. And I go back to what I do, which is helping people to think that through. And to think about, okay, if making money is your number one value, maybe that's the number one value you have, is to be as wealthy as you can be, etc. But also, another value you have is family time, which is going to come out on top if they compete. Yeah. So then you start to realise there's a pecking order with these values, and if you decide your family is more important than making money, then when push comes to shove and you've got to make decisions about jobs, careers, etc., that's the one that will win out. So as a typical example, for me, I once got offered 2 jobs at the same time. one job was a consultancy job, and I'd gone through an assessment centre, and I'd gone to a second interview, and I was just about to finish the second interview, and I asked the question, what's the best thing about working here, and what's the worst thing about working here? And the best thing was, fantastic lifestyle, great colleagues, wonderful work. What's the worst thing? I didn't see my children grow up.
Wow.
So I turned that job down, and I went to another job, which was less exciting, less interesting, but same pay, and allowed me to see my young kids at the time. But interestingly, as a result of going to that other job, within a month, I knew I'd made the wrong decision. Because actually the value that I put higher than my family, surprisingly, was the nature of the work and what it would do for me. So rather than having a boring job and being able to go home 5 o'clock, what I wanted was a more interesting job with varied hours and a more exciting lifestyle. And I made some sacrifices. But that's the value decision you have to make.
And as you said, it's about careers are an iterative thing. You start in one, and where you end up is not necessarily where you thought you'd begin.
No, and I suppose that the other thing to say about that sort of non-linear career, etc., is there is a pattern to my career, which is about identifying those things that have been common threads all the way through. And as I said, certain things to do with coaching, facilitation, analytic, writing, etc., have been common all the way through. They've just morphed into different shapes and different environments along the way and have been honed through practice. And I think it's that kind of understanding of yourself and reflection you need to do throughout your career. And when you're starting out, you have to start to pay attention to that, because too many people of my generation who've got to the other end of their careers and said, I didn't pay enough attention early on, and I've ended up somewhere I didn't want to be. So
listeners, wise advice there from David about having those thoughts at the early stages of your career so you can benefit from it instead of looking back in anger when you get to the end.
Absolutely.
So David, unfortunately time is running away with us.
Okay.
But we've still got time for the lightning round, which is a series of 3 quick questions. Yep. So question number 1, which book, except your own, would you recommend?
I recommend The Element, How Finding Your Passion Changes Everything, by Ken Robinson. Ken Robinson is an educationalist. He's Sir Ken Robinson. He wrote a great book. It's one of the books that made his name, which is stories about the creative journeys of very different people and how they ended up where they did. And it's very much along the themes I've just been talking about. And he's looking at the place where the things we love to do and the things that we're good at come together. And he tells stories of well-known people and unknown people, everybody from Mick Fleetwood, drummer of Fleetwood Mac, to Matt Groening, who wrote The Simpsons, and lots of people who are not well-known, about how they discovered what it was that actually they really wanted to do.
Excellent. I've not heard of that one myself, so that's one I'm definitely going to check out. And details will be in the show notes, listeners, so you don't have to frantically scribble them down. David, one internet resource that you'd recommend to help on people's job hunt?
I recommend www.plotter.co.uk. That's Plotr. This is a brand new site, which is a really interesting one because it's a combination of analysing all the things we've been talking about, funnily enough, your likes and dislikes, what you must have in terms of your career that you think you should have, your work styles based on your personality, your interests you have, the things you can't stand, skills you enjoy, your abilities, the culture fit you're looking for. All those things you can do through a kind of game, and you go through various levels of the game, and when you get to the end, it identifies the sort of careers and jobs that are actually existing that you are best suited for. So what it does is it matches that profile to an enormous database of thousands of jobs, apprenticeships, work opportunities, you name it, and it says, for example, There are 98% of the way you've completed that game suggests you'd make a great psychologist, for example. And the jobs that are available for psychologists are these ones, and there are 88 of them. Click here to apply. So it really does link you, the person, to real job opportunities and real careers.
Excellent. And again, that's a new one on me, so I'll have to check that out myself.
www.plotr.co.uk.
And listeners, I'll also in the show notes I'll describe what they reckon my ideal job would be, just to see how different it is to my current job.
Good stuff.
And finally, David, one tip that people can implement straight away.
My single piece of advice is start. Don't wait. So for me, it's about just doing something. A lot of people hold back for the perfect moment, the perfect job, don't apply for things, all sorts of things. Just do something. And as you do something, notice what you're doing, so that in the end you choose insight over hindsight.
Very, very wise words. David, it's been a pleasure to have you on the show. Before we close, how and where can people find you, and what's the best way to get in touch with you and your work?
You can find me all over the internet, because I'm quite busy on it. They can contact me via my website, www.learningtoleap.co.uk, and contact page there, or via Twitter at David_Shindler, Shindler, or they can connect with me on LinkedIn. I also, as you mentioned at the beginning, have a website with free resources for students and graduates on how making themselves more employable. And again, that's https://dash.bloomfire.com. All of these are different ways in which you can connect with me.
Thank you very much, David, for appearing on the Graduate Job Podcast.
My pleasure. Thanks, James.
Thank you again to David Shindler for sharing his thoughts on the transition from university to work. What can be a difficult time made worse by nagging parents and well-wishers inquiring, what are you going to do with your life? In terms of my 3 takeaways from this episode, the first is reflection. As David said, the time after university should be a period of reflection. The urge is to rush headlong into something, anything, but take some time out. Think about your values. Think, what is it that you're actually looking for from a job? Is it training? Is it money? Is it a work-life balance? Is it the desire to help people? Be honest with yourself. If there was to be a clash in these values, as was the case with David, which one will come out on top? You might not get the answer right the first time, but it pays to get clarity on it as early as you can in your career. Use the website David mentioned, which is plotter.co.uk, which will guide you through a range of careers based on your skills and preferences. I did this after we spoke, and the results were interesting. I've posted them in the show notes so you can see for yourself. So do check out Plotter, and also listen to episode 4 on career planning with Steve Rook, which contains great advice on how to start planning your career. The second key point for me was David's point on getting feedback on your skills from trusted people who you know. Might be lecturers, might be course mates, people you work with, but don't let them sugarcoat it, but let them tell you it straight. As David said, build on that feedback and let it shape how you communicate who you are in your job search. If you don't quite have that network to call on, think about investing in a career coach. Yes, there will be a cost, but in terms of your long-term career advancement, it will pay for itself many, many times over. As Bill Gates said, we all need people who will give us feedback. That's how we improve. My final takeaway is for those of you still at university. You can make the transition process a much smoother and easier journey if you start thinking about your CV and general experiences as early as possible. Don't wait to the end of the third year when you suddenly think, oh dear, better start getting something on my CV. Get the work experience early, take on those positions of responsibility in the university societies, and start to develop the skills and experience that employers are going to be looking for. It will certainly help you in the long run. So, that was episode 6. You can find the full transcript on the website at graduatejobpodcast.com/transition. Please get in touch with us via Twitter at gradjobpodcast, and please do leave a review on iTunes, just as S. Lanes did this week, who gave us 5 stars and said, Really enjoyed listening to these episodes. They provide really insightful advice and tips. Great to be able to listen to all of this information on a podcast. Look forward to new episodes. So, thank you very much, S-Lanes. And do join us next week when we start the first of our deep dives into getting jobs in specific industries, when we speak to PR expert and recruiter Sarah Stimson. It's a goodie. Hope you enjoyed the episode today, but more importantly, hope you use it and apply it. See you next week.